Well, hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us at the CTL today. I'm so happy to have Traci Birdsell here, who's going to talk to us about teaching adult learners. Thanks, Traci.
Yes, you're welcome. Thank you. I have my master's in adult education, and it was surprising to me because when I was doing it, I was actually teaching at the Adult Learning Center. And so it seemed as if what I was learning in theory, I was already applying during the day. So it was a backwards motion of learning. So instead of learning the theory and then going and doing it, I was doing it and then, oh, that's the name for what I'm doing. And so I think that a lot of times our adult learners maybe don't give themselves enough credit for the learning that they do on a daily basis. And so it's kind of, how do we hook on to that and encourage them in what they do know, but also let them know that there's new ways and different ways of learning as well. One of the things that you and I had talked about was how adult learning is so hard to define, because it's everything from formal learning, like what we're doing here today, college and that kind of stuff, all the way down to taking a yoga class or watching a video on YouTube. There's so many opportunities for adults to learn that it was really difficult for theorists to kind of get their minds around there wasn't one specific thing. And so it kind of has morphed over time. And so there's little pieces that you kind of pick up. So it's almost more of a toolbox way of looking at things. But to start out, what I want to do is have you think about, let's see what's gonna see how I have to do it to advance.
Try that guy.
Yeah, I did. Oh, there we go.
Okay.
Apparently I just need to fifth time's a charm. So what I want you to do is, on one side, I want you to take a couple minutes and think about your worst learning experience as an adult.
All right.
And sometimes that one can come pretty easy. Unfortunately, but so maybe just some highlights of what was going on or what your experience was. And we'll just take a few minutes and think about that. So as you think about what that felt like, now we're just going to flip the card and flip the coin and think about just an awesome learning experience that we had as an adult and what that might have looked and felt like.
Hard to pick.
Mhm. Okay. I'm gonna go ahead and stop sharing for a minute, just so we have some
Yeah.
discussion back and forth without looking at the PowerPoint.
Yeah.
So tell me a little bit about your good learning experience.
Okay. So I chose to think about when I started teaching the Hells Canyon Institute class here. And even though it was a teaching experience, I think I learned more than anyone because I didn't know how to teach that kind of class.
Mhm.
And so I had so much to learn, but what made it really empowering is I had a wonderful mentor, Patricia Keith. We'd been doing the class beforehand. And then I had all of these amazing people to collaborate with, my, fellow colleagues who were teaching modules in the class and the students. They all helped me to learn what I needed to do to offer that class. And then it was interdisciplinary and there were multiple modes of learning and it was place-based and experiential. And when I got to the end of that first year teaching that class, I knew that I had learned a lot, that I wanted to do it again, and that I wanted to learn more. So it was an incredibly powerful and exciting class. And there was so much that was new that, I really came out of it thinking, oh my gosh, I learned so much. And there's still a lot more to learn.
I really like your that aspect of being so excited that I learned so much, but there's so much more to learn.
Right.
Like, what else can I do? And how else would I modify this? Or what different kinds of curriculum do I want to do? Or what new out? I think that excitement is really when we're in education and we're teaching, that level of excitement is what we want our students to have too.
Yeah.
Is that I want to learn more about, they just get passionate about whatever topic that is,
right,
like we are,
right,
in a way. Yeah, exactly.
I know,
exactly.
you just like see all the
exactly.
coming off.
And
it's great to see that in our students.
Yeah, I know one of mine, I put one of mine was a little bit more self-directed learning, but when we went to DC, we went to the Holocaust Museum. And it was I just remember being so immersed not only in what the artifacts, that were around us, but just thinking about the aesthetic that was created to make you feel a certain way, and what emotions I was feeling, and how I wanted to learn, how I wanted to keep going and learn more. That there was that it was, the content wasn't easy, but the learning was easy. Like, it was just kind of like, you just go from one, like, I have to know what's next. I have to read, I want to look at this. I want to stand here and take this all in, kind of thing. So it just becomes this immersive experience, to where when you leave, that you're not the same that you were before you walked in. And even though that's a little bit, I don't know, I think both of our examples are like that. It's just a different way of learning, kind of some of the best learning, I think. So if we think about kind of the best learning, so now we're gonna flip it a little bit and go, and go to kind of that not so great experience learning, which we've all had, for different reasons. How would you explain that situation?
So the situation I thought about was a yoga class that I took, and I've done yoga for years and years, like my parents did. So I'm fairly experienced at it and felt pretty confident going into this class. That was with a guest instructor. It's not here in Livingston. It was in another city, but I went in, to take this special class with this instructor, and immediately felt like I didn't belong there. And part of that was because my body was a little different than some of the other practitioners. I was older, but also this instructor's style did not feel like I didn't feel like he wanted me to
Mhm.
learn. And in fact, you know, I was shamed because I drank water. And he said, we don't drink water in this class, you know, in front of everyone. So kind of
Mhm.
called out, and really just felt like, oh, maybe I don't belong
Mhm.
here. And you know, what was I thinking that I even thought I could do this
Mhm.
class when
Mhm.
really, in all truth, I probably could, but I wasn't
Mhm.
getting that message from the space or the instructor or the
Mhm.
design of the class. So
Wow. Yeah, it's tough when we're putting ourselves out there and being vulnerable,
Yeah.
right? When we go into a new situation, and we think that we at least have a basic level of understanding to do that. What's so funny to me, why I laughed a little bit is actually mine was a yoga class too.
Oh, no.
And again,
This thing
nothing
was
against
supposed to
yoga.
be so
Yes,
great,
exactly.
which it usually is.
But it was my first time, so I had never been to one.
Uh-huh.
And I was doing, I guess, kind of okay. I was, it's,
Yeah.
but then like all of a sudden the stomach flu came on. And I went to the front of the room and told the instructor, the lights are down. And I said, I think I have a stomach flu. I've got to go. And she's kind of looked at me like, what? And I just felt those same words that belittled, that I wasn't welcome. And so, and I left, I mean, I like picked up and left.
Right.
And I expected a call from the instructor or something like, are you okay? You know, I
Yeah.
know that you said you didn't feel well or whatever,
Right.
and didn't get any of that.
Mhm.
And I never went back just because it was just kind of like, okay, if you don't care about me as a person,
Right.
then what's the point? Because I could do something else than this one credit class,
Yes.
for example. So a lot of those same feelings, I think of, just that it didn't, and looking back on it now, I think as an educator, it didn't have to be that way.
Right.
Like it could have been such a different experience
Mhm.
in a different realm,
Yeah.
I guess. So
That's so interesting. I
Yeah.
wonder if this, if we had 20 people here.
Yeah. have some bad yoga experiences. Oh my goodness.
I hope not. I mean,
Yeah, I know, and I
actually
don't
love
think it
yoga.
is. But and I've tried it a couple times since then, and it hasn't been as bad. I just
Okay.
haven't been. I need to like go to Jeanette's class or something
Right.
and
No,
be
Jeanette, I highly recommend.
be a little bit more, have a softer instructor that I'm comfortable and that I know. But so I kind of wanted to start with just thinking about general learning experiences, and then kind of going on to some theory. So the kind of the father of adult learning theory is Malcolm Knowles, and he came up with the word andragogy, which is basically how adults learn. So basically saying that adults learn differently than children do. And so we needed to adapt our learning to that. And so he had 6 assumptions for adult learning. So I'm just going to show a quick video. And will this show on, do I have to do something different? It's a YouTube video that's.
Do you have a link? Or is it embedded?
It's embedded.
I think it should be okay.
Okay.
If you
I know
just click
sometimes
it.
the.
Yeah.
Knowles' 6 assumptions of adult learners. A term popular in the 60s by Knowles has been defined as the science of teaching. Assumptions of adult learners, which has become a cornerstone for in this learning content. Assumptions. One, they need to know. 2, disrespect.
So I think that not all, like I'm thinking about some of the things that were said in there and how well, adult learners are all intrinsically motivated. And it's like, well, not all of them. Some are, some aren't. But I think that the thing of that, a lot of young students, I'm thinking like little kids, are that extrinsically motivated. But I don't know, sometimes that when we're in high school, even I'm thinking about my son who's only a couple of years removed from high school. He's so used to having that extrinsic, you need to do this, you do this is when it's due, that transition to college was challenging for him because he had to learn so much more of that intrinsic, like, okay, I just need to get this done. If I want a grade, I need to get this done because no one's going to do it for me, kind of thing. And so I think some of the stuff that Noel's talked about definitely show the difference between the two, but that there's that time when additional training is needed to kind of flip the learning a little bit. And so some of the other, let's see if it'll let me click to the next one here. There we go. So Sharon Merriam has several books out. She's an adult theorist as well. And one of the main, if you're an adult learning theorist, you'll read some of her books. She compiles a lot of different theories as well. And so I used one of her articles on kind of changing the landscape of learning theories. So she kind of went over some different theories. But some of what she talked about was self-directed learning. So talking about how we talked about just the learning you do on a daily basis. So if you think about what kind of learning did you do, is there any kind of learning you did today?
Let's see. Well, I did some reading this morning.
Okay.
And well, I tried to do some technological stuff in this room, right? Yeah, troubleshooting how to set up this display. And probably other things as well.
Yeah.
Kind of drawing a blank.
Right. And I'm thinking that I was learning I'm going next weekend with a friend to Sandpoint and just telling my other friend about it. And she said, oh, well, where are you going? I was like, oh, I forgot. So I looked it up and I Googled it, found it, sent her the link. Just that kind of learning that we don't take value for. And one of the things this was interesting. So this was in 71. Tufts did research with Canadian adult learners. He found that 90% of the participants had engaged in an average of 100 hours of self-planned learning projects the previous year, whether it had to do with problems on the job, maybe personal responsibilities, leisure time. And I think people do so much more of that now with the internet, obviously, than in 1971, but doing stuff because we want to know about something, whether it's doing our job better or how do I build this box that I want to build at home or those kind of things. And so just
That's
that.
true. How many times during a day do I Google something?
You just,
because,
I wonder
that.
what the weather's going to be like, or I wonder, all the wondering that we do that we just don't give ourselves credit for. And so I think that the more maybe talking with students about the kind of self-directed learning that they're doing when they say, well, I'm not a good learner, I'm not a good student. Well, maybe you need some help in this area, but maybe you're really good at fixing cars. Well, how do you know how to do it? Well, I have to read the manual and I have to do, okay, well, that's all learning.
Yeah,
So we just need to shift your view a little bit,
right.
is what that talked about there. The next one is talking about transformational learning, and some of this, I love the way that they talked about it, but it talked about how learning is making sense of our experiences, and to make sense of our experiences, we may need to make a change in one of our beliefs or attitudes or in our entire perspective. A change in our entire perspective, the lens through which we make sense of the world, is the key to transformational learning. So it's that thinking one way and being challenged, and then thinking, well, maybe I need to learn something different, or maybe that line of thought isn't still relevant, or those kind of things. And so it totally, I thought about that specifically when you were talking about the Hell's Canyon Institute, just that transformation. You're not the same as you were before. And so just those moments that can happen, that can be big or little, but definitely transform the way that we think. And I think most people can come up with different points in their lives when they had that, whether it was through formal education or not. And so how can we kind of harness that energy that we talked about, that's kind of electric, that happens in those situations. And so the next few are context-based learning. So this is basically, we learn by being around others, and our thoughts and our everything's constructed by being around others, and what the situationality of where we're at in that moment in time, in that space, what we're learning, and all of that fits together. And so it talks about learning outside school is situation specific. So we're trying to solve a problem, essentially. And that it's how they talked about it was an interaction with people in a particular situation with particular tools or artifacts, whether it's language, signs, or symbols. Cognitive processes are required rather than in situations of simulated activity typical of school. So it's like it's kind of real life learning. And so I think we do a lot of that I think of like the nursing program or things like that, where we're getting that as much hands-on practical that we can. We do that in diesel tech. We do that in, sometimes the best way to do it is just to get your hand, for lack of a better term, kind of get your hands dirty and get in and do it. And whether you're writing a manuscript or you're doing a speech, or you can only talk theory for so long. Eventually you got to do the thing that you got to do. And so just that, and doing it within the context of what it's meant to be done in, I guess. There's, think about music, and there you practice by yourself, but eventually you're going to want to present to other people, and you have to kind of take that deep breath and put yourself out there and do that, regardless of what happens. And we're going to learn accordingly from what happens. So how would you see yourself in having that experience, whether in your classroom or maybe in your own learning?
It's interesting because I was thinking about my classroom, because I teach literature. That's my primary discipline. HCI, Hell's Canyon Institute, was exciting for me because it definitely took me outside the discipline. But in my discipline, reading is very much considered, a school activity, and yet it's not. We read all day long, and it's a part of, almost everything that
we do throughout our day,
Right.
especially if you're looking at your phone, right?
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
And so I think that sometimes I could probably try a little bit harder to talk about the kinds of reading we do that are not here in the classroom. And when I'm working with English majors, they have already bought into the idea that like this is the worthwhile application of what I'm learning, like reading the literature and talking about it and writing about it. But I don't always have that experience in my general education classes.
Oh,
You
yeah.
know, sometimes students sign up for those and they think I don't like to read or I don't like literature or I'm not good at it. But this is reminding me, you know, that connecting what we're doing in that class to all kinds of practices in our regular non-academic lives is actually pretty easy with reading. And I was thinking, you know, at the start of this, like, oh, I don't know if I do that. Now I realize that absolutely we have to close read situations or texts all the time and make decisions and understand the writer's strategies and understand what we are supposed to do once we read something.
Right. Well, I think that that's just, I mean, it's so much talking about when we get a little further down, it talks about having the right tools and how we look at the reading a newspaper, right, is going to be different than reading a textbook, which is going to be different than reading manual on how to install my dishwasher, kind of thing. But it's all the same. I'm reading, but it's totally different across the spectrum of how I'm doing that. Yeah. The next part is critical perspectives on learning, which has to do with power and race, gender, class, oppression, knowledge, truth. So very much a lot of the things that are in our newspapers right now. I know I was just reading an article earlier today about, I think it was Florida, I could be wrong, was wanting to throw out a bunch of their math textbooks because they said they had critical race theory in them, their elementary math books. And so I think that, you know, just that knowledge and that perspective of that there is power and there is a power between and acknowledging those things. Even that there's unwritten isn't the right word, but that there's a power balance between being a teacher and a student. And just to call it, say it for what it is, kind of thing. Not that it has to be, but it's just an inherent belief that we're as we're raised and we go through the school system as a younger student, and then as we get to college, it changes a little bit. But to acknowledge that that's there in the first place is something that's really important to do.
I really like to think about the question, you know, who is served by this work and who benefits from, you know,
exactly. That's a great way of putting it.
Sometimes that helps me step back, you know, and analyze myself and what I'm doing. It definitely can be a good question for students when they perhaps fault with an idea.
And that there's nothing wrong with finding fault with an idea. And for some students, it's the college is some of the first time that they're finding that being critical of things that they were maybe taught or that they learned or that they are learning, and to have that kind of freedom of expression sometimes for the first time.
Which is so exciting.
It is.
Yes.
Well, and I like how you mentioned about kind of doing it for yourself and asking that question of yourself and how we can model that for our students. Like, okay, I'm going to take a step back, but you're doing it. Sometimes I think we don't model enough out loud of what's going on in our brains. because we just do it naturally.
Right.
So our students assume that we do, oh, they just know. And it's like, no, what's going through my mind is I'm trying to figure out how to share this screen here and it's not working is, when we verbalize it, then they're like, oh, well, they're problem solving the same way I would, or they're really thinking or wrestling with something.
Yeah.
I think the more we do that as just people in general, and especially as a power structure of education.
Right.
I think that we can teach a lot in some of those side things that we do that are off content
Yeah.
related.
So is the theorist that you're drawing from, are they recommending maybe not so much in upending the power dynamic in the classroom? I mean, in the end, teachers do give grades to students.
Right.
There's no way around
Absolutely.
that.
Yeah.
But to just acknowledge.
And that was one of the things that they absolutely said was that that it not where'd it go? Because it was talking specifically about just acknowledging, being able to acknowledge
Right.
that it exists,
Mhm.
not necessarily, that it's, oh, I have power over you. It's not that I'm lording over you.
Yeah.
It's simply saying, yeah, you're right, I do have some power
Mhm.
because I give the grades.
Right.
I mean, that's inherent in this, but you also have power and that you can choose
And you earn the
with it.
grades.
Exactly.
Right,
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah.
No, I like that. I think that's-
One of the next part talks about, which here's what I was looking for. It says some things are as simple as openly acknowledging and addressing the power disparity between the teacher, facilitator, and the students that can be liberating.
Mhm.
And so I think that just that simple and quick statement,
Right.
can be helpful. This next part talks about the emotions, the body and spirit in learning, which I hadn't heard of that before, but once I started reading more about it, it was like, oh my, that's so, I understand it, that we have emotions involved in learning, whether it's let's say we think about math phobia and
Right.
those kind of things, where maybe we had a bad learning experience in math as a child, and then we come as an adult and we go through that same, and we have a similar stimuli that just that emotion just takes us right back
Right.
to where we were in third grade when I couldn't do a multiplication table or whatever. And so just that acknowledgement that learning brings emotion to things as well. Just like we were talking earlier, again, about, both of our examples of good learning and bad learning.
Yeah.
You could feel emotions between the two of us,
Right.
just in those simple examples
Right.
of what that brought.
Well, and I think, for so long, academics have, tried to ignore
Sure.
that aspect of learning. So, which we never can really.
Right.
So acknowledging it openly seems like a really productive move.
Mhm, mhm. Well, I think sometimes the emotions of learning take time. And sometimes as instructors, we don't have a lot of time
Yeah.
too, because it can really take off and unfold.
Mhm.
And so I think sometimes it's, it's protection on the instructor's part too, of needing to still get through
Mhm.
XYZ
Yeah.
as well too.
Mhm.
But they also talked about, I thought this was so cool. Dirks said that learning itself is inherently an imaginative, emotional act, and that significant learning is inconceivable without emotion and feelings.
Right.
And I thought, you're right. Any learning,
Yeah.
it's going to be that evoking
Mhm.
of emotion.
Mhm.
So you have your own experience and then you play that off of somebody else who's having a similar experience, but different in their own realm of understanding, right? And they also talk about having the body be connected as well, just physically, like through the stress that we might feel, or the exhilaration that we might feel that you can't. I mean, so often, especially this time of the semester, I see it in my students, they're just tired and they just feel like they just look done. And that's how you know you're so close, even whether you're working on, I mean, myself as a student, I remember when I was getting my PhD and I was ABD and I was driving 21st Street and at the top of the hill, I was like, screw this, I'm not doing this anymore. Why am I paying to have this horrible experience? And it's just not worth it. And by the time I hit McDonald's at the bottom, I was like, you're no quitter, you can do this, we're gonna finish. And it came for me to realize that just that body, that stress and all of that made it, that's why it was so close. Like, it's like once you get to that point, you're really just so close to that breakthrough. It's just a matter of pushing through. So how do we help our students push through even the physical manifestation of learning when it's not, when it's the stressful, hard stuff? And that learning,
do that.
I'm not sure. I don't know. I think that, I think sometimes it's, you've done this before, you've been here before, this time of the semester, it's tough because you feel like you're done, you can see the end, but this is when a lot of hard stuff is due. And it's a lot, not just in one class, but in 5 classes. And so you have to have that. Plus, if you're a working parent and you have all these other things going on, it's no wonder that you're stressed and that things are hard. But remember why you're doing it and press on and know that you've been through this before and you can do it again. That's a lot of the conversation that I have with my 23-year-old because she kind of tends to kind of waver through a semester. And so this is probably will be the week. This is usually kind of the week that we have the same discussion. It's kind of like, I know you want to quit, but you're too far in. This is, you can do this. It's normal. Everybody, there's a lot of people feeling the same way. I think that just that recognition that, and just calling it for what it is.
Well, and that's so interesting because I realized when I was an undergraduate, my mom was the person that I had this talk with as well. And I tell my students this, she used to always say at the end of the semester, you'll get through it, honey, you always do. And but then I was thinking for our, adult learner, non-traditional students, they may not have those kind of conversations with a parent anymore. So that is something we can, bring to the classroom as well.
Well, and think of our first generation students, who just don't have the parents like, well, if this is how hard it is, maybe you should quit. I mean, that they don't know that it's a normal cyclical thing that we go through. And so I think, again, so much of it is just calling things what they are. I think is helpful. And then they talk about the spirit and learning is kind of it's more about one's personal belief and experience of a higher power, higher purpose. Basically constructing meaning making. So what means something? Why does this mean something to you? And being able to connect the why back to this is, that's what you think of. You think of the why am I doing this? Because that helps you get through the slogging of what you're doing. And that sometimes it's just that connection with others as well, that others are having have a similar why. And knowing that. So the next part, I'm sorry, I'm losing. Wow, we're just talking. We're having a grand time. So the next part is kind of some of the theory. So the first part of it is an awareness. And so much of this kind of really what we've been talking about. is having an awareness of what's going on, calling things what they are, of having an awareness that some students, especially if they come, that there could be years between their traditional school experience and now their non-traditional school, or coming back as a non-trad, and understanding that the tools that they've learned in their daily lives and their daily jobs and that kind of stuff are serving them well, but they have to learn some new tools for the toolbox, and they might have to be explicitly taught those skills. This article here from Kenner and Weinerman is talking specifically about more about developmental students and developmental courses, but I think it still fits for so many of our learners coming back, is it's putting it in that not only having the awareness of it, but us as instructors having awareness of what they're coming with. And that sometimes that school piece is a small part of what they're coming with. And having them be able to provide activities for them to compare academic and non-academic learning. So, and some of that, I think some of this, as I was reading, some of it I know comes in like SD 107 kind of things, but I think even, kind of in that gen ed stuff, taking a moment to be like, okay, well, this isn't like you would read your newspaper, when you're, for example, in your literature class, I'm sure you already do this, where it's comparing, okay, you might read a magazine for this, but when you're reading this piece of literature, this is how you have to read it.
Yeah.
And it's just a different skill set that you're learning, and now you know how to do it. And so how do you address that in your class when you're kind of that, I'm thinking that 175 level, or?
Well, I mean, I start with close reading, and like I actually ask them to identify specific words, circle some words, and then we're going to talk for kind of a long time about this one word, and think about why the author might have chosen it to introduce rhetorical strategies, what effects it has on us as a reader, what else they could have done there, so we'll spend a long time on a very small piece of writing, just to introduce them to the kind of practice that is at the foundation of literary analysis.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Why is it? And I think that, it's so funny, is that in my undergrad, I was 3 classes short of being an English major. And I finally got to the point where I remember I was in one of my classes, and it had something to do with a tree. I don't remember, but everybody was kind of going off on, oh, it meant this, and it meant this, and the author was doing this. And I was thinking, maybe the dude just drove by a tree that he liked. Maybe it's just as simple as that. And then I thought, maybe I don't belong here because I just, because but we do need to be able to think, is it this? Is it this? We don't know. But the way we're thinking about it is what's important. And that skill of critical thought that we have. Let's see here. So the next type is framing. So basically just putting things, kind of showing them the box that it fits in, and that it's that talking about the tools aren't exclusive only in this little box. They can come over to this little box too, but they might be used a little bit differently. Some of those transferable skills that they might have, but giving them the why behind why are we doing this? How does this connect to either this class? How does it connect to your degree? How does it connect to something in the outside world? Why do things matter? And because we want to do, all of us want that. We want, when we go into a situation, we want to know, why should this be important to me? And so I think that the more we can do that with students, whether they actually get buy into it or not. We can't make them do that.
Right.
But if we give them just the opportunity of, okay, this is the why.
Mhm.
Oh, okay, well,
Yeah.
and then I can, I feel like I can do this, or maybe I'm more interested or more, have a little bit more buy-in than I did before.
Yeah, and I think we can both, offer them, this is how this might
Mhm.
apply, and also ask them,
Right,
once they
absolutely.
start, getting used to making those
Mhm.
connections, when they start coming up with them,
Mhm.
that's, I think, a really important step in the process too.
Absolutely. Well, and that they have the, kind of going back to that power, right?
Mhm.
We were talking about a
Yeah.
little bit earlier, that they have the power to make that connection.
Mhm.
Think this, I don't have to be, when they make that, when that flip happens, to realizing they're not going to be spoon-fed education.
Yeah.
And there has to be a certain level of being willing to do the work
Mhm.
and being willing to go learn, and being interested
Right.
and those kind of things,
Mhm.
that they can see those personal connections.
Right.
Because my why might be totally different than your why, and
Yeah.
that's okay, because we can
Right.
still learn the same content.
Mhm.
So the last one, it was interesting when I was reading this one, because it said competition and repetition. So competition, I thought meant like competing against others when I first read it, which I thought, well, that seems odd. But really what they were talking about was competing thought. So it's kind of like, I'm coming into this with this preconceived notion or whatever of what this should look like. And I'm coming up against something else that's not what I expected. So how do I reconcile that? And how do I become okay with that competing thought, and be able to take a look at it from different angles? And then am I changing my thought? Am I merely modifying my thought? Am I adding to it? Am I deciding that I was totally wrong wholeheartedly? Kit and caboodle, kind of
Right.
thing. And I thought that, so it says asking questions about the purpose behind reading the textbook and being transparent as to how the learner will be assessed in the understanding of the textbook can be directly compared with the skills required for reading an operational or technical manual. So kind of going back to, okay, this is how I read a textbook is going to be different than how I read my newspaper.
Right.
This is going to be different than how I'm going to read something that's technical writing.
Yeah.
And so, but it's all reading.
Yeah.
And to give them opportunities for repetition, opportunities to try it, but they also were clear that it's not doing repetition, the same thing over and over again. It's doing a similar skill, but coming at it different ways. And so I thought that was really interesting. So this here, just the picture of the student here is Michaela Kaufman. She's one of our nursing students from a couple of years ago, and she's practicing. She's a nurse up in Kootenai now. And so this just reminded me of, all of the good stuff we do and the outcomes that we have, and all the stuff that goes, the stuff we can control and the stuff that we can't. That we can try all these different ways, but we're coming up against another person that has their own way of thinking, and free will. And so how do we work within all of that to inform and to engage and to impact? So basically what the final part was, which I'm not sure that we have time for, but after somebody listens to this, they could, is thinking about, how this, how can you apply this in your class? So what nugget are you taking out? How could you apply it to a syllabus? How could you apply it to a specific lesson, or, or even personal learning? What could you take and begin to think about maybe a little bit differently? And so that's kind of the next steps,
Right.
is thinking about that and what kind of engagement to have. So anyway, thank you for having me here today.
Thank you. This has been such an amazing conversation. And I am thinking about changes to my syllabus and my teaching practice and classroom activities. So it's been great.
Thank you.
Just turning it.